Evelyn Hart buried her husband's badge beneath the floorboards, believing if she hid the symbol of his duty, she might finally silence the ghosts of his death. But some secrets refuse to stay buried, especially when fire and riders draw near. The wooden boards groaned beneath Evelyn Hart's weight as she knelt by the hearth, prying up the plank she had pulled loose so many times before. The hollow beneath smelled of earth and dust, and there it was, the gleam of a badge dulled with time. Samuel Hart's badge. She brushed it once with her fingers, the metal cold, heavy with meaning, before shoving it back into darkness. The badge had no right to torment her, and yet it did. She pressed the plank down firmly, flattening her palm against the wood as if she could push the memory of her husband deeper into the ground. Samuel had been more than her husband. He had been the law in this valley, and when the law died, it left nothing behind but pity, whispers, and the slow unraveling of her days. The town looked at her with soft eyes, their voices soaked with pity. Bread left at her door, warm hands squeezing her shoulder, muttered prayers at Sunday service. But Evelyn heard what lay beneath the kindness fragility. Widow, alone, useless. They didn't know the half of it. They didn't know Samuel's secrets, or why she had chosen to hide the badge where no one could ever see it. The night pressed close to the cabin, wind dragging long fingers across the shutters. Evelyn sat at her table with the lantern unlit. In the dark, the silence almost felt like company, as though Samuel lingered in the shadows. She pulled her shawl tighter, trying to convince herself the chill was from the air, and not from the weight pressing down on her chest. Memories clawed back no matter how she tried to bury them. Samuel's last ride out, the kiss he pressed against her lips longer than usual, the way his eyes searched hers as if memorizing her. By dawn, he was gone. By sundown, his body was laid out on a table. They said Boone Mercer's men had shot him, that it was quick, but Evelyn never trusted the neatness of that story. Samuel had been careful before his death, too careful. He wrote in a journal she wasn't allowed to touch. He hid things she couldn't explain. And then there was Boone himself. She forced herself not to think his name, but it rose unbidden. Boone Mercer, the outlaw they all feared. The man the valley whispered about as if speaking his name too loud would draw his fire down upon them. He wasn't only the killer of her husband. He was the boy who once held her heart. Evelyn shook the thought away and stared out the window. The fields stretched silver under the moon, the forest at their edge, black and still. Somewhere out there, men rode with torches and hunger. Already, a neighbor's ranch had burned. She told herself she had nothing left they could want. But fear settled deep in her belly. Fear not just of the outlaws, but of the truths she had never confessed. The badge beneath the floor felt like it burned hotter than the fire ever had. She wanted to lift the plank, to clutch it to her chest, but she could not bring herself to do it. The badge had been Samuel's, not hers, and it carried weight she could never bear. She told herself it was safer in the dark. The clock ticked soft and steady on the mantel. Midnight edged closer. Evelyn let her head fall back against the chair, eyes drifting shut. She thought of Samuel's steady hands, of Boone's dangerous smile, of all the choices that led her here, alone in the quiet. For a moment, she let herself drift into the edge of sleep, and then it came. The knock. It wasn't the hurried pounding of a neighbor in trouble, nor the nervous tap of a child. It was slow, heavy, deliberate. Each strike rattled the frame of the door, as though whoever stood outside wanted her to feel the weight of their presence. Evelyn's eyes flew open. Her breath caught sharp in her throat. Every sound in the cabin seemed to vanish the ticking clock, the whisper of wind. All that remained was the echo of that knock in her ears, pounding as loud as her heart. She rose, her hands trembling as she clutched her shawl tighter. The lantern remained unlit. She told herself she would not move closer, but her feet carried her toward the door anyway. Another knock came, louder this time, the wood trembling under the force. And then, a voice, low, rough, confident, even in Mrs. Hart. The blood drained from her face. Someone out there knew her name. Someone out there knew she was alone, and someone had come for her in the dark. Evelyn froze, her hand inches from the latch. torn between bolting into the night or opening the door to face whatever shadow had finally come knocking. When Evelyn Hart finally unlatched the door, the night delivered not a neighbor or a beggar, but a scarred drifter whose shadow carried the weight of old blood. His eyes glimmered with secrets, and his presence whispered danger before he ever spoke a word. The heavy door groaned as Evelyn pulled it open, her grip tight on the edge as though she might slam it shut again at the first wrong move. The cold rushed in with the night air, but colder still was the man standing before her. He was tall, shoulders broad beneath a weather-worn coat, his hat pulled low, shadowing half his face. The lantern light from inside caught the sharp line of his jaw, the stubble like steel across his skin, one scar cut from his brow to his cheek, a pale reminder of violence that had nearly taken his eye. He stood still, unmoving, his boots planted firm in the dirt as though he had been waiting for her all along. And when his gaze lifted to meet hers, Evelyn felt her breath snag. His eyes were dark, watchful, carrying the weight of a man who had seen too much and trusted too little. "Evening, Mrs. Hart," he said again, his voice low, gravelly, each word carrying the slow measure of a man used to being obeyed. Evelyn's hand tightened on the doorframe. Her first instinct was to slam it shut, to lock the bolt and pray he walked away. Yet something in the way he stood held her. Not just danger, something else. Recognition. "You know my name," she said, her voice thin but steady. He gave a slow nod. "Word travels." But Evelyn caught the flicker in his eyes. It wasn't word of mouth that told him who she was. He knew. Somehow, he knew. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the restless snort of a horse tethered behind him. Evelyn's heart thumped like a drum, her mind torn between slamming the door and demanding answers. She did neither. Instead, she stepped back just enough to let him cross the threshold. The man stepped inside, the wooden floor groaning beneath his weight. The air seemed to tighten with him in the room, the shadows pulling closer. Evelyn moved to the lantern, striking it to life. The glow spread across his features, and for the first time, she saw him clearly. He was younger than she expected, no older than his mid-30s, but his face bore the map of years that had carved too deep. The scar across his cheek was only one of many. His hands, when he pulled off his gloves, were rough, knuckles swollen, one finger crooked from an old break. This was a man who had fought, who had killed, and who had survived by force of will alone. "What do you want?" Evelyn asked, her voice steadier now, though her heart still raced. The man studied her a long moment before answering. "Name's Elias Crow. I'm just looking for a roof tonight. Road's been long, colder than I care for." His words were plain, but his tone was not. Evelyn heard the coil of something behind them, something unspoken. She had lived too long with silence not to hear what men left unsaid. "You came knocking at midnight," she said, her eyes narrowing. "That doesn't sound like a man just looking for shelter." The corner of his dust mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, not quite a sneer. "Fair point." Evelyn folded her arms across her chest, the shawl hanging loose around her shoulders. She studied him, and every instinct screamed at her to send him back into the dark. But loneliness had claws, and they dug deep. Samuel was gone. Boone was a ghost she hated herself for remembering, and here stood a man whose presence both unsettled and steadied her at once. She gestured to the chair opposite the hearth. "Sit." Elias didn't thank her. He simply took the seat, leaning back as if he had every right to it. The fire crackled faintly, and for a moment, the silence stretched again. Evelyn busied herself at the stove, pouring water into the kettle, giving her hands something to do. "Where are you from?" she asked, her tone casual, though her eyes stayed sharp. Elias shrugged. "Nowhere that matters. I've been riding a long while, place to place, looking for work, sometimes trouble. Seems to me trouble finds you," Evelyn said. This time, he smiled a crooked, tired smile. "You're not wrong." The kettle hissed, and Evelyn poured 2 mugs. She handed him one, her hand steady despite the storm inside her. Elias took it without hesitation, his fingers brushing hers for the briefest moment. The touch was enough to jolt something inside her she had buried with Samuel, a reminder of closeness, of warmth, She pulled her hand back too quickly. He studied her as he sipped the tea, his eyes never leaving her face. "Your husband," he said suddenly, voice soft, almost cautious. "Samuel Hart, sheriff." The words were a knife. Evelyn stiffened, her mug clattering against the table. She hadn't spoken Samuel's name aloud to anyone in weeks. "What do you know of him?" she asked, her voice sharp. Elias didn't answer at once. His gaze dropped to the fire, shadows flickering across his scar. "I knew him," he said at last, "better than most." Evelyn's heart pounded. Her mind flashed to the badge beneath the floorboards, the journal Samuel had hidden, the secrets he'd carried to his grave. This stranger, this Elias Crow, wasn't here by chance. "You're lying," she whispered, though part of her already knew he wasn't. Elias lifted his eyes to hers, and for the first time, she saw not just hardness, but something else, regret. "I ain't lying, Mrs. Hart. Samuel was a good man, but he carried things you don't know about, things that got him killed." The room seemed to tilt. Evelyn gripped the back of the chair to steady herself. She wanted to shout at him, to demand answers, but fear froze her throat. "What things?" she finally managed. Elias leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his gaze locked to hers. The firelight caught in his eyes, glinting like coals. He lowered his voice to a near whisper, each word weighted like lead. Samuel Hart wasn't just a lawman. He was a man caught in a storm bigger than this valley. And Boone Mercer wasn't the one who pulled the trigger. Evelyn's breath caught. The room spun. All the pieces she had buried, all the questions she had tried to silence, they crashed into her at once. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice trembling. "Why are you telling me this?" Elias rose slowly from the chair, his shadow stretching tall across the wall. He stepped closer, and though fear flared in her chest, she didn't move. His presence was overwhelming, his voice low and steady as he leaned close. "Because, Mrs. Hart," he whispered, the words brushing the air between them like a confession, "Samuel's story ain't finished, and neither is yours." He paused, his gaze burning into hers, and then, softly, like a prayer or a curse, he spoke Samuel's name. "Samuel." Evelyn froze at the sound, her blood running cold. Elias had spoken her husband's name not as a memory, but as though Samuel Hart still belonged to him. Elias Crow's voice carried the weight of smoke and gunfire when he warned Evelyn Hart that Boone Mercer's men were moving through the valley, setting ranches aflame one by one. The words hit Evelyn harder than the midnight knock that had brought him to her door. She had known of whispers, faint rumors in the marketplace of riders at dusk, of smoke rising in the distance, but to hear it spoken here, inside her home, by a stranger whose scarred face seemed carved from the very violence he described, it turned whispers into reality. She gripped the edge of the table as Elias's eyes stayed fixed on her, steady and unblinking. The firelight danced between them, throwing his shadow tall against the wall. "They burned the Kettle Farm 2 nights back," he said, his tone calm but edged with iron. "Took the stock, left nothing but ash and bones." Evelyn's breath caught. The Kettles were not friends, not exactly, but neighbors all the same. She remembered the children running wild through the creek in summer, their laughter echoing through the hills. The thought of that house reduced to blackened ruin made her stomach twist. And now, she forced the words past the tightness in her throat. Elias leaned back slightly in the chair, his scar catching the light. "Now they're ridin' closer. Boone don't leave the land behind him untouched. When he rides, fire follows." At the sound of Boone's name, Evelyn felt her pulse quicken, not with the heat of anger alone, but with something older, sharper, a wound that had never closed. She hated herself for it, but even now, just hearing his name breathed life into memories she had tried to bury as deep as Samuel's badge. Boone Mercer, the boy with wild eyes who once swore he'd tear down the world if it ever tried to take her from him. The man who had become the very fire eating through the valley. Evelyn turned from Elias, her arms folding across her chest as if she could shield herself from his words. "Why tell me this?" she asked. "Why come here? If Boone is burning everything in his path, then you've brought danger to my door." Elias did not flinch. "Danger was riding this way whether I knocked or not." Best you know what's comin'." His answer stoked both fear and fury inside her. She had lived with fear since Samuel's death, but fury that was something different, something she had not felt in a long time. Fury meant Samuel's sacrifice had not ended anything. It meant Boone was still out there, writing his legend in fire. She moved toward the window, peering into the darkness beyond the glass. The valley lay quiet under moonlight, but she could almost see the phantom glow of distant flames rising at the horizon. "If he's comin' here," she whispered, "then he knows." Elias's gaze sharpened. "Knows what?" Her heart hammered. She swallowed hard, realizing too late what she'd let slip. "Nothing," she said quickly. Her voice clipped. "He doesn't know anything." But the weight of Elias's stare told her he didn't believe a word of it. The kettle hissed on the stove, breaking the heavy silence. Evelyn poured herself another mug. Though her hands shook so badly, half of it sloshed across the table. She didn't drink. She couldn't. Elias rose from his chair, slow and deliberate. His boots thudded softly against the boards, each step deliberate, each step pulling the air tighter around them. He stopped only a few feet away, close enough that Evelyn could smell the trail on him: dust, leather, and smoke that clung like a second skin. "You've got something Boone wants," he said. "Else he wouldn't ride this far. He don't waste fire for nothing." Evelyn lifted her chin, forcing steel into her voice. "And what if I do?" His eyes narrowed. "Then you best decide quick whether you're keeping it or letting it burn with the rest." The silence that followed was thick, heavy with truths neither dared speak aloud. Evelyn turned from him again, afraid he would read the truth in her eyes if she met his gaze, afraid he already had. All night, her thoughts refused to settle. The valley itself seemed to hum with tension, as if every tree, every fence post, every blade of grass waited for fire. Elias lingered in the chair by the hearth, his presence both a shield and a threat. Evelyn kept her distance, pacing the cabin, clutching her shawl tight against her shoulders as though it might hold her together. When the first hint of dawn brushed the sky, she could take the silence no longer. She dropped to her knees beside the hearth, fingers prying at the loose board. She had to see it, had to touch it, to remind herself it was still there. Samuel's badge, the last piece of him she had. Her hand slipped beneath the board, searching the hollow she knew so well. Her fingers scraped dirt, splinters, empty space. She froze, her pulse thundering in her ears. She reached again, deeper, frantic now. Nothing. The badge was gone. Her breath caught, sharp and ragged. She stared down into the hollow, her hand trembling above the empty space where her husband's memory should have been. Her mind raced, questions crashing like a storm. Had Elias taken it? Had Boone already been here? Or had the past itself finally risen to claim what she thought she had buried? Evelyn turned sharply, her eyes locking on Elias Crow, and in his gaze, calm and knowing, she saw no surprise. The badge was gone, and Elias looked at her as if he had known all along. Elias Crow laid Samuel Hart's badge on Evelyn's table, and the sight of it froze her blood. It gleamed faintly in the lantern light, but its silver surface was streaked with fresh blood. Evelyn's knees weakened, and she gripped the back of a chair to steady herself. For a moment, the world tilted. That badge was supposed to be beneath the floorboards, hidden away where no one could reach it. It was the one secret she had sworn never to let the valley touch. Yet here it was, laid bare in front of her, baptized in blood. Her voice broke through the silence, sharp, trembling. "Where did you get that?" Elias leaned back in his chair, his scar catching the flicker of firelight. His expression was unreadable, the kind of mask worn by men who'd seen enough death to know silence was its own kind of power. He did not answer at once, and the weight of that pause burned hotter in Evelyn's chest than the question itself. Her hand shook as she reached for the badge, but halfway there she stopped. The blood smeared across the metal made her recoil. It was not Samuel's blood, she knew that. His had long since been spilled into the dirt of the valley. This was new, a fresh wound carried into her home. Evelyn's voice hardened. "Was it you? Did you take it from beneath my floor? Or has Boone already been inside my house?" Elias's gaze flicked to her, steady and dark. "If Boone had been inside," he said, his tone calm, "this house wouldn't be standin'." The words did not comfort her. If anything, they sharpened her fear, because if Boone hadn't taken the badge, then Elias had. And if Elias had dug into the floorboards, then he knew too much already. Her mind churned with the memory of Samuel's steady hands, the way he'd pressed that badge to his chest the morning he left for the last time. He had kissed her, whispered promises, and ridden into the valley, never to return. That badge had been his oath, his curse, and now it lay between her and this scarred stranger, bleeding as though the past itself refused to die. Evelyn drew closer to the table, her eyes never leaving Elias. "Why bring it to me?" she asked. "Why not keep it if you were the one to take it?" Elias set his mug down with a soft thud, his face unreadable. "Because it's yours, always was. I figured you ought to see it before the fire reached your door." His words twisted like a blade. Was it warning or threat? His calmness only made her distrust burn hotter. She wanted to shout, to demand the truth, but the sound caught in her throat. Loneliness had already carved her hollow. Suspicion threatened to break her completely. The badge gleamed between them, the blood on it drying to a dark crust. To Evelyn, it looked less like silver now, and more like a brand, searing her even without touch. She thought of Samuel's journal, hidden beneath the same boards, and the secrets inside it. Had Elias read it? Had Boone's men found it? Every hidden thing seemed ready to claw its way into the open. Her chest tightened, as tears welled unbidden in her eyes. She hated them, hated the weakness they betrayed. "You don't know what that badge means," she whispered. Elias leaned forward, his elbows on the table, his voice a low growl. "Don't I? I rode long enough with men who knew the weight of it. I saw what happens when law and outlaw ain't as different as they pretend. That badge killed as sure as any gun." His words struck her like a slap. Evelyn flinched, her hand clenching into a fist against the wood. She wanted to deny him, to defend Samuel's honor, but deep down, she knew Samuel hadn't been as spotless as the town believed. His journal had been proof enough of that, and now Elias spoke as if he knew those same truths. "Why are you here, Elias?" she demanded, her voice sharper now. "Why my door, my table, my floorboards?" For the first time, his mask cracked, the shadow in his eyes deepened, and something softer flickered their regret. "Because Samuel trusted me," he said quietly, "and because I owe him more than silence." Evelyn staggered back a step, her hand pressed to her lips. The room seemed to close in, the walls pressing tighter, the air heavier. She wanted to believe him, but every instinct warned her not to. Yet the way he spoke Samuel's name steady, weighted, alive, struck a chord she couldn't ignore. Her heart warred with itself. Part of her wanted to throw Elias out into the cold, to bolt the door, and never look at him again. But another part, the part carved hollow by grief, longed for the truth he carried, no matter how dangerous it might be. Her gaze dropped again to the badge. It sat like a curse on her table, dragging Samuel's ghost into her present. Every breath she took felt heavier with the memory of him, with the shadow of Boone Mercer burning through the valley. The fire popped in the hearth, startling her. The sudden sound snapped the fragile silence, and Elias's hand drifted instinctively toward the revolver at his hip. Evelyn flinched, realizing then just how close danger sat inside her home. She pushed the badge across the table toward him, her hand trembling. "Take it," she whispered. "I don't want it." But Elias didn't move. His gaze stayed locked on hers, steady, unflinching. "It ain't mine to take. You can hide it. You can burn it. But it'll follow you all the same." Her throat tightened. She hated him for being right. That badge had never left her, not truly, no matter how deep she buried it. It lived in her dreams, in her waking hours, in the pitying stares of the townsfolk, in the shadows Boone Mercer cast across the valley. The silence stretched again, broken only by Evelyn's ragged breathing. She turned toward the window, staring out into the darkness, and then she heard it faint at first, but real. The distant echo of hooves, carrying on the wind. Her blood ran cold. Boone's riders. They were closer than she had dared imagine. Elias rose, his hand resting firmly on the grip of his revolver. His eyes narrowed toward the window. "They're moving fast." Evelyn's heart thundered. She clutched the edge of the table, her knuckles white, the badge gleaming between her hands as though mocking her fear. And then, a gunshot split the night. The sound cracked through the valley, shattering the fragile stillness of her cabin. Evelyn gasped, the mug slipping from her hand, shattering on the floor. A gunshot rang out in the night, its echo rattling through the valley, and Evelyn knew the fire was closer than ever. Evelyn Hart stood at her window and saw smoke rising on the horizon, the neighbor's homestead swallowed by fire. The night sky glowed orange, the flames licking higher than the trees, painting the valley in terror. The sight froze her where she stood, her hand pressed against the glass, her breath fogging the pain as she stared helplessly at the destruction unfurling in the distance. The fire raged wild, devouring wood and roof beams, the smoke curling thick into the night sky. She could almost hear the screams carried by the wind, though she prayed they were only in her mind. Beside her, Elias Crow moved with tense precision. He was already at the door, revolver at his hip, eyes scanning the darkness as though expecting the fire to leap the distance and land upon her cabin next. His presence filled the room with a dangerous calm, the kind of steadiness that only men who had lived through too many battles carried. "That's the Price homestead," Evelyn whispered, her voice trembling. "They've got children." Elias didn't turn. "Had children," he said flatly, his tone like cold steel. "Boone's men don't leave nothing behind." The words struck her like a hammer, stealing her breath. She staggered back from the window, clutching the shawl around her shoulders, as though it might shield her from the truth burning outside. For so long she had told herself the whispers were only that rumors, warnings carried on the wind. But now she saw it with her own eyes. Boone Mercer's war on the valley had begun. The fire lit the horizon, and with every flicker Evelyn felt the walls of her cabin grow smaller, her secrets heavier. Hiding had been her way of survival, burying Samuel's badge, burying her memories, burying even her voice. But fire did not respect walls or silence. It consumed, it claimed, it dragged everything hidden into the open. Elias turned from the door and fixed his gaze on her. "We need to leave." Evelyn shook her head, her hands trembling. "Leave? This is my home. Samuel built this with his own hands. I can't." "You can." Elias cut in sharply. His voice carried no patience, no softness. "Boone's men ain't stopping with the Prices. They'll be here next. You stay. You burn." His bluntness made her flinch. Anger sparked in her chest, small but fierce. "Why should I trust you?" she demanded. "You came knocking at my door in the dead of night with Samuel's badge in your hand, and now you expect me to follow you into the dark." Elias's jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing. "You don't have to trust me. Trust the fire. It's moving closer every hour." The air between them grew thick, heavy with unspoken truths. Evelyn's mind raced with questions she didn't dare ask. How had Elias found Samuel's badge? How much did he know of her husband's death? Why did Boone still ride this valley like a curse that would not lift? She turned back to the window, her chest rising and falling with ragged breaths. The smoke was spreading, the flames bending with the wind as though reaching for her. Her home suddenly felt fragile, as if one spark could turn it into the same blackened ruin. The Price homestead collapsed in the distance, its roof giving way in a shower of sparks. Evelyn pressed her hand against her mouth, stifling a sob. The fire did not care for memories or walls or the strength of prayers. It consumed everything without mercy. Elias stepped closer, his voice low, urgent. "You stay here. You die here. Boone's men ride hard, and they ride mean. Jed Monroe likes the torch. Silas Creed's quicker with a trigger than Breathin, and Harlan Voss, he's a tracker. He'll find you even if you run." Hearing their names sent a chill through Evelyn. She had heard whispers of them before Jed, the fire-setter who laughed while homes burned. Silas, the cold-eyed gunslinger. Harlan, the silent shadow who never lost a trail. They weren't just men. They were the storm Boone Mercer unleashed upon the valley. Her voice quivered. "Why? Why burn everything?" Elias's eyes darkened. "Because Boone ain't after land or gold. He's after fear. He wants the valley to bow, to remember his name in every ash heap." The name Boone Mercer curled through her like smoke, burning her lungs with every breath. Once, long ago, His voice had been the softest she knew, his hands the gentlest. Now, he was the monster, burning families alive. Her heart twisted with guilt and rage, the memories of what she once felt for him a poison she could not spit out. Her mind returned to Samuel's badge, streaked with blood, a symbol of law that had failed her, failed the valley. All she had left of her husband now felt like a curse that drew fire closer to her door. The flames on the horizon flared higher, the sky itself glowing as though dawn had come too early. But this was no dawn. It was the end of night as the valley knew it. Evelyn stepped back from the window, tears streaking her cheeks. "Where would we go?" she whispered. "If I leave this place, I have nothing." Elias's voice was firm, resolute. "Better nothing than ash. You can rebuild nothing. You can't rebuild bones." His words struck deep. She hated him for being right, hated him for tearing her from the fragile safety she had built from silence and walls. But the sight of that homestead collapsing told her the truth hiding would not save her. A sudden sound split the night, a horse's neigh carried on the wind. Elias stiffened, his hand snapping to his revolver. Evelyn's heart leapt into her throat as she peered through the window. Figures moved in the distance, shadows against the fire. Riders. The flames framed them, their silhouettes dark and sharp. 3 of them Jed Monroe, tall and wild, swinging a torch even from horseback, Silas Creed, calm, rifle across his lap, and Harlan Voss, silent, his eyes glinting like a predator's in the firelight. They rode like demons from the blaze, circling the ruin of the Price farm, then turning their horses toward the open fields, toward her. Evelyn stumbled back, her breath coming fast. "They're coming." Elias was already moving, his voice steady but urgent. Then we moved faster. But before she could gather her shawl, before she could decide whether to run or fight, she froze. From the smoke itself, riding at the center like a king of fire, came a fourth rider, his hat low, his coat black against the orange glow, his presence larger than the others combined. The flames bent with the wind as though framing him, crowning him, Boone Mercer, alive, furious, and heading straight for her valley. Evelyn's breath caught as Boone Mercer's shadow rose through the smoke, the firelight painting him not as a man, but as a fury returned from the grave. Boone Mercer emerged from the firelight not just as the outlaw scourge of the valley, but as the man Evelyn Hart had once loved in secret, long before Samuel, long before the badge. The sight of him made her chest constrict, not from smoke or fear, but from something older, more dangerous. Boone rode at the head of his men like a king crowned in fire, his black coat whipped in the wind, his broad shoulders rigid, his hands steady on the reins. His face, half lit by the glow of burning timber, was the same, and yet unrecognizable. The wild grin of the boy she had known was gone. In its place was a man forged in fury, his jaw hard, his eyes lit with a merciless fire that seemed to burn hotter than the flames themselves. Evelyn staggered back from the window, pressing her hand to her chest as if to hold her heart in place. Memories she had buried for years clawed their way to the surface. Boone as a boy, leaning against the split-rail fence, his hair falling into his eyes as he promised her the world. Boone whispering her name under the stars, his touch rough and gentle all at once. Boone swearing he would never let anything tear her from him. And now here he was, tearing everything down. Behind her, Elias Crow's voice cut through the storm of her thoughts. "You know him." It wasn't a question, it was an accusation, low and edged. Evelyn didn't answer. She couldn't. Her throat had closed around the truth, her breath shallow as she watched Boone draw nearer, his men fanning out like wolves circling prey. The fire outside crackled and roared, the Price homestead collapsing fully into ash, sparks flying high into the night. And within that inferno rode the war inside her, her past colliding with her present. When Boone reined his horse to a halt just beyond her fence line, Evelyn felt the years collapse between them in an instant. His eyes lifted toward the cabin, and though the distance was wide, she felt his gaze land on her as surely as if he had pressed a hand to her cheek. Her knees trembled. He had seen her. He knew. "Evelyn!" His voice thundered across the distance, cutting through the crackle of fire and the howl of wind. It was the same voice that had once whispered love, now hardened into a roar of fury. "You can't hide from me forever." Her breath hitched, her body swaying as though struck. She clutched the table for balance, the badge still lying there, its blood-stained gleam mocking her. Elias stepped closer, his revolver drawn, his eyes sharp on Boone. "He ain't here for land," he muttered. "He's here for you." The words landed heavy. Deep down, Evelyn had known it. The fires Boone set, the valley he scorched, this was more than conquest. It was personal. Boone Mercer hadn't forgotten her. He hadn't forgiven her. And now, he had returned not just to claim the valley, but to make her answer for leaving him. Her heart split itself in two. The boy she remembered still lived in her memory. Tender, reckless, wild with love. But the man before her was something else entirely. A shadow of that boy, twisted by betrayal and rage. She whispered his name into the empty air of the cabin, though she hadn't meant to. "Boone." Elias's head snapped toward her, his expression cutting. "You were his." It wasn't a question, and she had no strength left to deny it. Outside, Boone dismounted, his boots sinking into the dirt as he stepped forward. Fire lit his face, the scar along his jaw catching the glow like a brand. His hand rested on the butt of his revolver, though he did not yet draw it. He didn't need to. His presence alone carried the promise of violence. "You chose him," Boone shouted, his voice carrying over the flames. His eyes burned with a fury that had waited years to be unleashed. "You chose the badge over me, and look what it bought you. Ashes, grief, nothing but silence in that house." Evelyn's eyes filled with tears, but she refused to let them fall. His words cut deeper than any blade, because they carried truth she could not deny. She had chosen Samuel, chosen safety, chosen duty over the wildfire Boone offered, and in the end, Samuel had left her broken and alone. Elias moved closer, his voice low and sharp. "He's baiting you. Don't listen." But Evelyn couldn't stop hearing Boone's words. They echoed inside her like church bells tolling for the dead. Boone's fury wasn't only for the valley, it was for her, for the years she had stolen from him, for the love she had buried beneath Samuel's vows. The fire burned higher, its light reflecting in Evelyn's eyes as she stepped closer to the window. Boone's face, harsh and furious, softened for just a flicker of a moment when he saw her silhouette. The boy she remembered flashed through the man he had become, but the moment vanished as quickly as it came, crushed beneath the weight of his rage. "You should have been mine," Boone growled, his voice shaking with both anger and longing. "Now I'll take back what the badge stole." Elias's hand tightened on his revolver, his stance tense. "He'll burn you out," he warned her. "That's how he works. He won't stop until there's nothing left but smoke." Evelyn's pulse hammered in her ears. Her heart tore itself apart between memory and reality. The boy she had once kissed beneath summer stars was gone, replaced by this outlaw who promised ruin. Yet somewhere, buried deep beneath the scars and fire, she thought she saw a trace of the Boone she had loved, and that trace was what frightened her most. The silence between them broke when Boone lifted his arm and pointed toward her cabin. His eyes locked on hers, and his words rolled out like a verdict. "Tomorrow night, Evelyn," he shouted, his voice a promise carved in stone. "Your house will burn." Boone Mercer vowed that Evelyn Hart's home, the last piece of her life with Samuel, would be the next to fall to. His fire. As the flames devoured the valley, Evelyn Hart's mind betrayed her, dragging her back to the stolen youth she once shared with Boone Mercer, before Samuel, before the badge, before love curdled into fire. The night after Boone's vow, Evelyn sat in her cabin with the shutters drawn tight, but the glow of the burning valley still seeped through the cracks. The fire outside was more than light, it was memory. Every flicker on the walls sent her mind spinning backward to the summer nights of her girlhood, when Boone had been nothing more than a wild-eyed boy with laughter in his voice and promises on his lips. She remembered the creek where they used to meet, where Boone would strip off his boots and wade into the water with reckless joy, splashing until she laughed so hard her sides ached. He would look at her then, his grin bright and hungry, and vow that one day he'd build her a home with his own two hands. She'd believed him, once, believed every word, because when Boone spoke, the world itself seemed to bend toward him. But those days had turned to ash long before the fires came to the valley. Boone had grown restless, impatient with the limits of small-town life, furious at the law that hemmed him in. Evelyn had seen it in his eyes, the hunger for more, for power, for freedom no man could rein in. And she, foolish in her youth, had thought her love might tame him. It hadn't. The memory burned as fierce as the fire now spreading through the valley. She remembered the night Boone disappeared into the dark, chasing the life of an outlaw, leaving her standing on her porch with her heart in her throat. That was the night she swore never to wait for him again. Samuel Hart had come into her life soon after, steady where Boone had been reckless, firm where Boone had been wild. Samuel carried duty like a shield, and though his love was quieter, it was safe, or so she believed. Choosing Samuel had been choosing peace over fire. She had thought herself wise. And yet, as she sat with the fire painting her walls orange and red, regret gnawed at her bones. Boone had not been erased by her vows to Samuel. He had lived in her memory all these years, and now he had returned in flesh and fury, his fire consuming everything she thought she had built to replace him. Her hands shook as she gripped the arms of her chair. Every flame outside felt like a reflection of her guilt burning for the choices she had made, for the betrayals she had dealt, for the lives lost in the wake of her silence. Boone's anger was not just against Samuel's badge. It was against her, against the girl who had promised him forever and then broken it. The sound of hooves echoed faintly across the valley, drawing closer with each passing night. Elias had said, Boone's men moved like wolves, circling, testing, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Evelyn heard them sometimes in the dark, the distant whinny of horses, the faint laughter carried on the wind, cruel and sharp. It was a reminder that her walls, her silence, her hidden badge could not protect her forever. She rose from the chair and moved to the window. The smoke from the Price homestead still lingered, heavy and bitter, drifting across the fields. The air smelled of ruin. Evelyn pressed her hand to the glass, and in the reflection she saw her own face, drawn and weary, framed by the firelight. For a fleeting moment, she saw the girl she had been, standing by the creek with Boone's hand wrapped around hers. But the woman staring back was older, scarred by grief, and carrying secrets that threatened to crush her. Her throat tightened as tears blurred her vision. She whispered into the dark, though she knew no one would hear. Why did you have to come back? Behind her, Elias stirred. He had not slept since Boone's vow. He leaned against the wall, his revolver never far from his hand, his eyes sharp on every sound outside. He looked at her then, his face unreadable. He ain't here just for the valley. He's here for you. The words made her flinch. They were true, and they cut deep. Boone's fire was not for land or gold. It was for her, for the girl who had chosen another, for the woman who had buried his memory, for the love that had turned to betrayal. Evelyn wrapped her arms around herself, fighting the shiver that raced down her spine. The fire outside hissed and cracked, and she swore it whispered her name in Boone's voice. She wanted to believe there was still some trace of the boy she had loved inside the man who now burned families alive. But deep down, she knew that boy had died long ago. The silence of the night was broken by a sharp sound against her door. Evelyn jumped, her breath catching, while Elias's revolver was in his hand in an instant. They froze, listening. Another sound followed, the scrape of metal against wood. Elias moved first, crossing the room with quick, silent steps. He wrenched the door open, revolver raised, but the porch was empty, the yard lit only by the distant glow of fire. Whoever had been there was gone, swallowed by the night. Evelyn's eyes dropped to the door itself. A scrap of paper had been nailed into the wood, the nail driven deep. She reached for it with trembling hands, her breath ragged as she pulled it free. The paper was rough, torn from some ledger, the letters carved into it with angry force. She read the words aloud, her voice barely more than a whisper. Tomorrow, your turn. Her hands shook so violently she almost dropped the note. Elias took it from her, his jaw tightening as he read it for himself. The firelight caught in his scar, and for the first time since she'd met him, Evelyn saw a flicker of something close to fear in his eyes. The valley was burning, and now Boone Mercer had given his promise. Tomorrow, her home would be next. Evelyn stared at the nailed note, her heart hammering with dread. Boone's fire had moved from her horizon to her doorstep, and tomorrow, it would consume her world. Hook. When Elias Crow finally spoke the truth, it was with a quiet weight that cut deeper than a shout. I rode with Boone once. The words hung in the air like smoke. Evelyn froze where she stood, the nailed note still clutched in her trembling hand. The fire's glow seeped through the cracks in the shutters, painting the room in orange, but all she could see was Elias's face. His scar seemed sharper in the lamplight, his eyes darker, as if the confession itself had dragged old ghosts to the surface. Her breath caught, sharp and shallow. "What did you say?" Elias didn't flinch. He met her gaze steadily, his voice even but rough, like gravel ground under a boot. "I rode with Boone Mercer's gang, long before this valley burned." The room tilted around her. Evelyn staggered back a step, the note slipping from her hand and fluttering to the floor. Her mind swirled with disbelief and fury. The stranger who had walked into her home with Samuel's badge, who warned her of Boone's men, who stood like a shield against the fire, had once been one of them. "You expect me to trust you?" she whispered, her voice cracking with anger. "When you've just told me you're cut from the same cloth as him?" Elias's jaw tightened, his eyes hardening as though bracing for the blow of her words. "I didn't come here to lie, Evelyn. I came here to make it right." "Make it right?" Her laugh was bitter, sharp, laced with grief. "You ride with Boone, and now my neighbors burn, my valley burns, and I have a note nailed to my door promising my home will burn next, and you dare say you're here to make it right?" Elias stood silent, taking her fury without defense. For a moment she hated him more for that silence than for his confession. Silence. Always silence. Samuel had carried secrets in silence. Boone had left her in silence. And now Elias stood before her, silent as though the weight of her life could be balanced by the heaviness in his stare. She turned from him, her hands gripping the back of the chair as though it might keep her upright. Her chest heaved with ragged breaths. In that moment she felt cornered, trapped between two dangerous men, one who had promised to love her and now promised to burn her, and another who claimed to protect her yet had once ridden with her enemy. The fire outside crackled louder, carried on the wind, as if the land itself wanted to remind her of the threat pressing closer. She thought of Boone's vow, of Samuel's blood-stained badge, of Elias's scarred face, all pieces of a puzzle that seemed to twist her life into knots she could not untangle. "Why?" she asked at last, her voice trembling but quieter now, almost broken. "Why tell me this now?" Elias's shoulders slumped, the hardness in his stance giving way to something wearier. "Because you deserve to know who stands in your house. I ain't hiding what I was. I ain't proud of it. I was young, angry, hungry for something bigger than dirt and dust. Boone gave me that. He gave me a place, a purpose." He paused, his voice lowering. "But Boone's purpose was always fire, always taken, always destroying, and I couldn't stomach it. I left before the fire consumed me, but I never forgot what I'd done, who I'd ridden with." Evelyn searched his face for truth, for even a flicker of deceit, but what she saw unsettled her more than a lie would have. Regret, deep, unshakable regret. Still, it was not enough. "And what about now?" she pressed, her voice fierce despite the tears brimming in her eyes. "Why here? Why me?" Elias's eyes softened, though his tone remained heavy. "Because Samuel Hart knew too much. He was on Boone's trail, closer than anyone else had ever gotten. That's why Boone wanted him dead. And that's why you're not safe, Evelyn. Boone don't just burn for power. He burns to erase anyone who ever stood against him." Her stomach twisted. She thought of Samuel's journal hidden beneath the floorboards, of the secrets he had carried to his grave. She had always known Boone's hand was in Samuel's death, but hearing it now, from the lips of a man who had once ridden beside Boone, ripped open the wound anew. "And you?" she whispered, her voice cracking. "Were you there when he died?" Elias's silence was answer enough. The tears finally spilled down her cheeks. She turned away from him, her hands covering her mouth to stifle the sob threatening to escape. She couldn't bear it, the fire outside, the betrayal within, the memory of Samuel, the ghost of Boone, and now Elias's confession. It was too much. The silence pressed on, thick and unbearable, until Elias spoke again. His voice was low, steady, almost pleading. "I didn't pull the trigger, Evelyn, but I was close enough to smell the gunpowder. That truth's mine to carry, and I came here to tell you, not because you need me, but because whether you like it or not, Boone's coming, and when he does, you'll need someone who knows how he thinks." She didn't answer. She couldn't. Her body trembled as she moved toward the window, her gaze sweeping the horizon. The fire was spreading, brighter than the night before, creeping closer to her land. Her home, Samuel's home, stood on borrowed time. Then came the sound that made her heart seize, the distant rumble of hooves, faint but unmistakable. Riders. Elias moved to the window beside her, his face grim. "They're at the river crossing. Boone's men. Tomorrow they'll be on your land." Evelyn's breath hitched. The note on the door had not been an idle threat. Tomorrow meant tonight was her last. The silence between them grew sharp. Every sound outside amplified the crackle of fire, the restless whinny of horses, the groan of timbers in the shifting wind. Evelyn clutched the edge of the table, her mind racing with terror and fury. She didn't trust Elias, but she didn't trust herself to survive without him, either. Hours later, when the fire had died to a dull glow on the horizon, Evelyn heard Elias leave the cabin. She told herself she wouldn't follow, wouldn't watch, wouldn't care, but the quiet tug of suspicion pulled her to the window, then to the door, and finally to the edge of the yard. The barn loomed in the moonlight, its shadow long and dark. She heard his voice from within, low and sharp, words too quiet to make out. For a moment she thought he was speaking to the horses, but then she heard it, the pause, the rhythm, the unmistakable cadence of a man speaking to another. Her breath caught. She pressed closer to the barn wall, straining to hear. "Tomorrow night," Elias whispered. "It has to be done before Boone rides through. She can't know until it's too late." Evelyn's blood ran cold. Her hand covered her mouth to keep from gasping aloud. He wasn't alone, and whatever Elias Crow was planning, he was keeping it from her. Evelyn froze in the moonlight, the weight of Elias's whispered words cutting her deeper than Boone's threats. He had a plan, he had a partner, and she was the one being kept in the dark. Hook, in the dead of night. Evelyn pried up the familiar floorboard where Samuel's badge had once been buried, and instead of silence, she found a hidden journal that carried more weight than the badge ever had. Her fingers trembled as she tugged the plank free. The hollow beneath, long her secret, now seemed deeper, darker. Where the badge had once lain gleaming, another shape emerged, thicker, bound in leather, edges frayed by time. Evelyn's heart lurched as she pulled it free. It was Samuel's journal, hidden away as carefully as she had hidden her grief. The leather cover was stiff, worn by sweat and dust. She traced her fingertips over the surface, the way she might have once traced Samuel's hand in the quiet of dawn. A single word, pressed deep by his writing hand, was scrawled inside the first page. Mercer. Her breath caught. She turned the pages quickly, her eyes devouring the words. Samuel's handwriting, steady and deliberate, carried weight in every line. He had written not of simple duties, not of town disputes or cattle thieves, but of something far darker. Boone's gang is not their own. They ride for more than fire and plunder. There are men with money and power in these hills, hiding behind badges of their own. Corruption runs deeper than the valley knows. Evelyn's hands shook so badly the words blurred. She forced herself to keep reading, though each sentence felt like a stone pressing harder on her chest. Samuel had known. He had known that Boone was not the beginning of the fire, but a weapon wielded by others, men sworn to uphold the very law Samuel himself had carried on his chest. The badge she had buried had not only been a symbol of Samuel's oath, it had been a shield hiding lies. Her mind reeled. Samuel's death had never been as simple as a bullet in the dark. His choices, his silence, his pursuit of truths bigger than himself, had they invited the bullet that ended him? Had he buried his secrets beneath her floor, not to protect her, but to protect himself? Evelyn pressed the journal against her chest. tears spilling hot and unbidden. She had built her grief on the belief that Samuel had died a martyr, cut down by Boone Mercer's rage. But here, in her hands, was proof that Samuel had walked willingly into danger, chasing truths that had left her widowed. Her whole world tilted. Her anger, her guilt, her love, they all tangled into one unbearable knot. The fire outside seemed to hiss louder, crackling like laughter. She thought of Boone, of the boy who once swore to love her, now turned into a man of fury. She thought of Elias, whose confession still echoed in her ears, and now Samuel, her husband, the man she had chosen for safety, was revealed to have carried a secret war that had ended in his grave. The floorboards groaned beneath her knees, as if the house itself bore witness to the weight of betrayal. Beneath her, the hollow felt like a grave, not just for Samuel's badge, but for her illusions, her peace, her very sense of who she had been. Evelyn closed the journal and pressed her forehead against its cover. "Why didn't you tell me, Samuel?" she whispered. Her tears dampened the leather. "Why did you leave me with this?" Every choice she had made now seemed poisoned. She had left Boone for Samuel, only to learn Samuel's life had been tangled with Boone's all along. The boy she once loved had burned into an outlaw. The man she had married had chased justice into corruption, and she had been left with nothing but ashes. The silence of the house pressed in tight, broken only by Elias's footsteps as he entered from the yard. He froze when he saw the journal in her hands, his eyes narrowing, his scar catching the lantern light. "You found it," he said quietly, almost as if he had expected it. Evelyn clutched the journal tighter. "You knew." Her voice was low, bitter. "You knew he had secrets." Elias didn't deny it. Samuel was closer than any man to the truth. That's why Boone couldn't let him live. Her voice cracked as she shouted, "And you? Were you part of it? Were you there when he wrote these words?" Elias stepped closer, his voice low but steady. "I didn't need to read them to know. I rode with Boone. I saw the men behind him, the ones with gold in their pockets and law on their tongues. Samuel's death wasn't just Boone's wrath, it was their order." Evelyn's stomach twisted. The journal felt like a curse in her hands. The fire outside was no longer just Boone's, it was the fire of corruption, of betrayal, of a truth so large it threatened to consume everything she had left. The lantern flickered as if caught in the breath of the storm. The silence outside shifted, no longer still but tense. Evelyn held her breath, straining to listen, and then she heard it. Hooves, faint at first, like the distant beat of a drum, then louder, closer, surrounding. Her blood ran cold. She moved to the window, pulling the curtain aside just enough to see. Figures moved in the moonlight, dark against the glow of the fire. Riders, dozens of them, circling like wolves around prey. The sound of hooves grew into a thunder that rattled her floorboards, shook the glass in her windows. Elias was already at the door, revolver drawn, his face grim. "They've come." Evelyn's hand tightened around Samuel's journal, the floor beneath her trembling with the weight of Boone's men closing in. The thunder of hooves encircled the house, shaking the walls, as Boone's gang surrounded Evelyn's home, trapping her with Samuel's secrets and no way out. The first roar of flames came from the barn. Smoke surged upward, swallowing the night, as Boone Mercer's gang set fire to Evelyn Hart's land. Evelyn's body jolted at the crackle of fire, splitting the silence. She rushed to the window, her breath fogging the glass. The barn stood in full blaze, orange tongues of flame licking skyward, sparks leaping into the black like fireflies of war. The dry wood groaned and popped, collapsing under the heat. Smoke rolled thick across the yard, curling against her cabin like a suffocating fist. Elias Crow was already at the door, revolver drawn, his voice low but urgent. "They've come to flush us out." Evelyn's heart thundered. For weeks she had told herself she could hide behind silence, behind wood and prayer. But fire cared nothing for walls. It crept and consumed until nothing was left. She clutched Samuel's journal to her chest, her other hand reaching instinctively toward the floorboard where his badge had once rested. The barn collapsed in a shower of sparks, embers spinning through the wind like burning snow. From the smoke, shapes emerged, men on horseback, their torches blazing. Jed Monroe, tall and wild-eyed, swung his torch like a weapon, hollering with laughter. Silas Creed sat calm and steady, his rifle balanced across his saddle, and Harlan Voss, silent as a shadow, scanned the yard with eyes that seemed to pierce the walls. Evelyn stumbled back from the window, fear clawing at her throat. "They're here." Elias didn't waste time. He pushed the door open and stepped onto the porch, his revolver aimed. "Stay inside. Keep low." But Evelyn couldn't stay still. She moved toward the hearth where Samuel's blood-stained badge lay on the table. The firelight from outside glinted across its silver surface, the red streak on it glowing as if alive. It seemed to pulse with heat, with memory, with Samuel's voice telling her to fight, to stand. She grabbed the badge, the metal burning cold against her palm, and clutched it tight. It was no longer Samuel's alone, it was hers now, and it weighed heavier than steel. Gunfire cracked across the yard. Elias's revolver barked, the shots sharp against the roar of fire. Evelyn dropped to her knees beside the window, peering out. She saw Jed wheel his horse, his torch waving like a banner of chaos. Silas's rifle fired back, the bullet splintering wood from the porch beam inches from Elias's head. Harlan dismounted, slipping into the shadows like smoke itself. The fire grew hungrier, sparks flying across the yard toward the cabin. Evelyn's lungs burned from the thickening smoke. The heat pressed through the walls, and she felt her home shudder as if it knew its end had come. "Elias!" she cried, panic breaking her voice. "They'll burn us alive." He ducked behind a post, firing another shot. "Not if we make 'em bleed first." Evelyn's chest ached. She clutched the badge tighter, her eyes darting to Samuel's journal still resting on the table. The pages inside held truths, secrets, names that could shatter the valley. But if the fire reached them, they would burn, and Samuel's fight would be buried forever. She rushed to the journal, tucking it beneath her arm. The choice tore at her heart: save Samuel's memory, or save herself. She couldn't leave it behind, yet carrying it made her a target of both Boone's fury and Elias's suspicion. The crack of wood outside jolted her. Jed had dismounted and was at the barn's remains, feeding the fire with whatever timber he could find. The blaze spread across the yard like a living beast. Silas's shots rang steady, keeping Elias pinned, and somewhere in the smoke, Harlan moved unseen. Evelyn pressed her back against the wall, clutching the journal and badge together. Her hands shook, her mind racing with fear. The fire's glow crept through the shutters, painting the cabin red, as though the house itself had been thrown into Boone's inferno. Suddenly, a crash at the back of the house shook her from the floor. She turned, her heart leaping into her throat. Through the rear window, she saw Harlan Voss's shadow slip close, a blade glinting in his hand. She gasped and stumbled back, her voice breaking. "Elias! He's at the back!" Elias spun and fired 2 quick shots into the dark. A grunt of pain followed, but Harlan's shadow vanished into the smoke. The battle pressed tighter. Evelyn's cabin was no longer a home, it was a trap. The fire tightening its grip, Boone's men circling like wolves. The smoke clawed its way through the cracks in the door, filling her lungs, blurring her vision. She stumbled to the table, her hand slamming against the lantern. She almost lit it, then froze. Fire was already at her door. Why invite it in? Outside, the laughter of Jed Monroe echoed, cruel and wild. "Burn, widow!" he shouted, swinging his torch toward the cabin. Flames licked the porch beam, smoke curling through the roof. Evelyn coughed, choking, her knees buckling. She felt the badge burn in her palm, the journal heavy beneath her arm. Her tears cut through the soot on her cheeks. For a moment she thought of Samuel's voice, Boone's touch, Elias's eyes, 3 men tangled in her fate, 3 shadows pressing her toward a choice. A gunshot split the night, then another, then silence. Evelyn staggered to the window, her vision blurred. Through the smoke she saw Jed's horse running wild without a rider. Silas reloaded calmly, his rifle glinting. Harlan's shadow crept closer again. And then, through the haze of fire, another figure stepped forward. Boone Mercer. He moved like he belonged to the flames, his coat trailing behind him, his face lit in firelight, his eyes locked on the cabin. Smoke curled around him as though he commanded it. His voice, when it came, rolled across the yard like thunder. Evelyn, her name, spoken with fury, with longing, with a promise of ruin. Her knees weakened. The badge slipped from her hand and clattered to the floor, glowing red in the firelight as though alive. Boone Mercer stepped into the blaze, his voice cutting through the smoke as he called Evelyn's name, his fire finally at her doorstep. Smoke thickened around the cabin as Boone Mercer stepped through the firelight, his revolver low at his side, his eyes fixed on Evelyn Hart. Behind her, Elias Crow raised his gun too, and in that choking haze of fire and shadows, both men demanded her trust. The air inside the cabin had turned to ash. Evelyn coughed as smoke clawed at her throat, her eyes watering as she stumbled back from the door. The barn was gone, the porch beams aflame, and now Boone stood in the yard, larger than life, fire dancing at his back, as though he commanded the very inferno. Evelyn, Boone's voice rolled through the night, heavy and raw. Come out. You don't belong in that tomb. You belong with me. Elias's voice cut sharp behind her. Don't listen. He'll drag you straight into hell. Evelyn's heart pounded, torn between the two voices. Boone's words carried heat she had once craved, a dangerous tenderness buried in fury. Elias's words were cold steel, protective but edged with his own shadows. She felt her chest splitting, her lungs crushed by smoke and memory alike. A gunshot cracked, the bullet punching through the wall inches from her head. Evelyn screamed and dropped low, pressing herself against the floor as splinters rained around her. Silas Creed's rifle barked again outside, each shot a warning that her walls were failing. Elias moved fast, yanking her down behind the table. His face, streaked with soot, was hard but steady. Stay with me. We can fight our way out. But Evelyn's eyes were locked on Boone through the window. His shadow swayed with the fire, his revolver glinting in the flames. For a heartbeat, she saw not the outlaw leader but the boy who had once promised her forever by the creek. The fire roared louder, smoke pouring through every crack. Her home groaned as if ready to collapse. Evelyn coughed hard, her lungs burning, her mind screaming for air. Then came the sound that made her blood run cold, the clatter of Samuel's badge as it slipped from the table, bouncing once on the floor before skidding into the fire creeping along the boards. The silver gleamed red, glowing hotter as the flames licked it, as though Samuel himself were being consumed all over again. No, Evelyn cried, reaching forward, but Elias pulled her back. Leave it. You'll burn. Tears streaked her soot-stained cheeks. That badge had been Samuel's life, his oath, his curse. Watching it curl and blacken in the fire felt like losing him again, and yet a strange relief flickered through her chest, an ending, a release. Gunfire cracked again. Bullets tore through the walls, splintering wood, showering them with shards. Elias fired back, his shots snapping through the smoke. Outside, Boone didn't flinch. He stepped closer, his eyes never leaving Evelyn. Think about it, Evelyn, Boone shouted, his voice rising above the chaos. That badge didn't save him. It buried him, and it'll bury you too if you keep following his ghost. Evelyn's heart twisted. Boone's words echoed Samuel's journal, the lines about corruption, the truths buried beneath law and oath. She remembered Samuel's steady eyes, his silence, his secrets. Had the badge truly been his undoing? Elias's voice snapped her back. He's lying. Boone killed Samuel, Evelyn. Don't you dare let him twist it. Her mind tore in two. Boone's fury, Elias's regret, both pulling her apart, both demanding trust. She felt herself unraveling between fire and shadow. Another shot ripped through the wall, grazing Elias's arm. He hissed in pain, his revolver still steady, his blood dripping onto the floor. Evelyn pressed her hand against the wound, her fingers slick with his blood. For a moment, their eyes locked hers wide with fear, his steady with grim determination. Outside, Boone stepped closer, his boots crunching over ash. He stopped just beyond the porch, the fire painting him like a demon returned from her past. His voice thundered, cutting through the night. You want the truth, Evelyn? He shouted, his eyes burning into hers. Samuel Hart didn't die by my hand. He died because the law he wore on his chest betrayed him. Ask your stranger there, he knows it. The words slammed into her chest harder than any bullet. Her body went cold. She turned slowly to Elias, her voice breaking. What does he mean? Elias's silence was louder than the gunfire, heavier than the fire's roar, and Evelyn knew, in that silence, that Boone's words carried more than rage, they carried truth. Boone Mercer shouted the truth through fire and gunfire. Samuel Hart had not been killed by him, but by betrayal within the very law he served. Evelyn's world cracked as Elias's silence confirmed it. Through the roar of the blaze and the staccato crack of rifles, Boone Mercer's voice split the night. Samuel Hart hadn't been killed by outlaws at all, he'd been betrayed from within the law he served. Smoke folded into the room like a living thing, black and choking. Evelyn Hart coughed hard enough to taste blood. One palm pressed to the scorched floor while the other groped blindly toward the heat shimmer where Samuel's badge had fallen. The silver lay half swallowed by flame, edges curling like a dying leaf, the blood stain on it seared to black. Boone's words raked through her worse than the smoke. Not outlaws, betrayal. Inside the badge, inside the oaths, inside her home. Elias Crow knelt beside her, dragging her behind the fallen table as another bullet tore splinters from the doorframe. Keep your head down, he barked, voice hoarse, but she barely heard him. The world had tilted, as if the floorboards had given way to a hidden pit and were pulling her in. Say his name, Boone shouted from the yard, flames laddering up the porch post behind him. Or I will. Evelyn's eyes cut to Elias. He didn't blink, didn't breathe. The silence in him was a wall she couldn't climb. Something inside her buckled. Samuel, who had kissed her brow before dawn and said he'd be back for supper. Samuel, whose body returned on a shutter taken from a window. Samuel, whose badge she'd hidden like a sin. If Boone told the truth, if the law itself had opened the door for the bullet, then everything she'd built her grief upon was ash. Who? She rasped, throat raw and burning. Who put him in the ground? Boone's hat brim gleamed with ember light as he stepped closer. Deputy Cal Rooker, he called, voice a verdict. The badge that rode behind your husband, the one who knew his roots and ours, who opened his mouth to men with gold and shut it to honor. Elias flinched. It was small, but Evelyn saw at the first crack in his stone-still calm. She forced herself upright, shoulders to the table's broken edge, lungs clawing for air. Rooker, she repeated, the name tasting like iron. She pictured the man's gentle manners in the street, the way he had bowed his head over the coffin, the tears he hadn't shed. She felt a nausea so strong she had to swallow twice against it. Rooker fed your husband's trail to a cattle syndicate wearing church suits and county pins. Boone went on, relentless. Men who paid for quiet and wanted Samuel loud men silenced. They used me to take the blame. Clean, neat. They pushed a badge to kill a badge. Elias's jaw worked. Enough, Boone, he growled through his teeth. You had enough years ago. Boone snapped back, stepping still closer. Fire streaked his cheek like war paint. You were there when the bargain was struck, maybe not in that barn, but close enough to smell the lies. Down. Elias shoved Evelyn as Silas Creed's rifle cracked from the dark. The shot buried itself in the wall above her head. Her shoulder slammed the floor. Samuel's charred badge winked from the ember bed an arm's length away, bright as a star, going out. She crawled. Heat blistered her skin, a raw sting along her palm as she hooked 2 fingers under the badge and dragged it free of the coals. The metal burned, and she hissed, but she didn't let go. She pressed the badge into the cooled patch of her skirt, breath sawing. Around the edges, the silver had blackened. In the middle, the star still showed, warped, ugly, stubbornly there. You see it. Boone's voice had changed. For an instant she heard the boy he'd been. You see what that thing is? It ain't him. It's a door they used to walk straight through his heart. Evelyn's vision wavered. The badge lay in her lap like a talisman and a wound. In the journal's precise lines, Samuel had written about men behind men, hands behind hands. She had read the words and tried to swallow them. Now they rose like bile. Had Samuel known Rooker by name? Had he made a list, set it under her feet, and left her to stand on the trap door without telling her where it swung? Evelyn, Elias said, and she heard a plea buried under the gravel. Boone twists truth till it screams. Rooker took money, yes. He warned the syndicate Samuel was close, yes. But Boone pulled the rope. He pulled it because he wanted to hurt what took you from him. A low laugh came from the yard. It held no humor. If I'd pulled it, she'd have heard the knot. Boone lifted his gun and fired once, not at the door, not at Elias, but into the air. The crack ricocheted around the valley. I don't need to lie to her. Every lie that mattered came wearing a star. Evelyn couldn't breathe for a heartbeat. Then breath returned as a sob. She was not a woman given to screaming, so the sound didn't come out as one. It came out as a hard exhale, a breaking inside that made room for something else. Rage. Not the wild camp kind that scatters, but the compact heat that forges. It gathered behind her sternum with frightening clarity. Rage said, "He left you with silence. They left you with fire. You are done asking men for the shape of your life." She pushed to her feet. "Get back," Elias ordered, but she didn't. The window glass glowed like a furnace plate. Through it, Boone watched her, a single figure framed by chew-black smoke and glittering ash. His eyes were not the boy's. They were the man's prize. They knew what they had done and what they'd lost, and how little either could be repaired. "Did you watch him die?" she asked. Her voice surprised her. Low, steady, iron-balanced. "Answer me plain." Elias's hand hovered near her sleeve but didn't touch. Boone's gaze flicked, just once, to the scorched shape in her hands. "I watched him fall," Boone said flat. "I watched the dust rise. I watched Rooker ride away. And I watched the men who paid him count faster than a church deacon on a tithe day. And you let it happen." Elias's words landed soft, the softness worse than a shout. "You let it happen and you ran." Boone's lip curled. "I didn't run. I learned. And now I'm teaching the valley what Samuel tried to write. Fire makes a better sermon than ink." Evelyn closed her fist around the badge. Pain needled up her arm. She welcomed it. It was honest. She thought of the creek, of summer laughter, of Samuel's slow smile over coffee in the gray hour before dawn, of Elias's scar and the way his eyes had slid when she asked who pulled the trigger. 3 men, 3 kinds of love or almost love, and behind them a ledger of names she didn't yet know. Cal Rooker, the syndicate, county pins and church collars. The fire outside hissed on the eaves as if impatient for her answer. She moved to the hearth, nudged aside a wedge of ember with the toe of her boot, and set the badge down on the iron lip. It smoked and sizzled like a thing alive. She kept her hand on it until the burn pressed deep enough to set its memory inside her palm. When she lifted her hand, a star-shaped welt and reddened the skin. She didn't flinch. "This doesn't belong to Samuel anymore," she said. "It belongs to me, to what I choose." Silas fired again. Elias leaned into the doorway, returned 2 shots that punched sparks off a porch post, and sent Jed Monroe cursing into the dark. Harlan Voss ghosted right, his shadow skimming the fence. The cabin groaned. A beam up in the rafters coughed flame. Smoke poured down in a choking curtain. "Evelyn," Elias's voice carried that plea again. "We have to move." "We will," she said. "After I hear every piece." Boone smiled without mirth. "This is all the peace you need, girl. The men who wear the badge run with men who own the land. Rooker took their coin. I took their cover. Your husband tried to pull the sheet, and they smothered him with it. And you?" she said, eyes never leaving his. "What do you take now?" He didn't look away. "The fear back from folks that gave it to me. The valley will learn who to bow to. And you," his voice dropped, and the wind went still enough to carry it whole. "You will look at what you chose and decide if you can live with it." The floor shuddered as a crossbeam slipped and smashed against the table's far leg. The table rocked. A black lake of soot slid across the planks. Evelyn's head swam. Heat had a taste, and it was in her mouth now, bitter and metallic. She crouched, scooped the badge from the hearth, and tucked it into the inside seam of her bodice, where the heat couldn't find it. The skin beneath would blister later. The pain now focused her to a point. "You asked me to choose," she said. "I am." She reached under the fallen table and hauled up Samuel's rifle, the one he'd cleaned until it gleamed. the one she had not touched since the day after the funeral. It was heavier than she remembered, or maybe she was stronger than she'd been. She checked the chamber, felt the push of rounds slide, then stood straight into the smoke. Elias's hand landed on the barrel, then lifted away when he saw her eyes. "Don't do anything foolish," he said, but there was something like respect in it too, the shadow of a man who had been waiting to see if she'd stand. She stepped to the threshold. Boone waited 5 paces beyond the fire-washed steps, his men a restless half-circle in the gloom. Wind tugged sparks into a low galaxy around him. He tilted his head, studying her the way a man studies a horizon he means to ride past. "You're not the girl I knew," he said. "No," Evelyn agreed. "She died on a shutter with Samuel, and I didn't notice until tonight." For a quiet 3 seconds they held one another's gaze, history stretched between like an old rope bridge. It wouldn't hold both their weights anymore. In her chest, grief found its shape and locked into place beside rage. She could live with that weight, she realized. She couldn't live with lies. Boone lifted his revolver. "Rooker meets at Hollow Bend after moonrise," he said, sudden and sharp, as if he'd kept one last card for the instant before fire took it from him. "He'll be waiting to hear if your house is ash. If you want the man who sold your life, he'll be there." Elias cussed under his breath, a flat word that sounded like a prayer in reverse. The admission cost Boone something. Evelyn saw him pay it in the set of his mouth. The choice came at her fast and simple. Stay and burn. Run and hunt. Fold her heart around Samuel's last clean memory or tear it open and fill it with names. She lifted the rifle to her shoulder. Her hands were steady now, steadier than they had any right to be. "Then we're done here," she said. "You take your men and your fire and you go." Boone's eyes cooled. "Or what?" She aimed center mass. The sight picture settled like a calm breath. "Or I put you in the ground," Rooker dug for Samuel. Before Boone could answer, Elias stepped forward hard, shoulder brushing her, voice low at her ear. "Don't," he said. "If you shoot him, the gang burns you where you stand. If you let him ride, we take Rooker and the men behind him, and the rot that made all this." The rifle's stock pressed a crescent into Evelyn's collarbone. Her finger found the curve of the trigger. Fire talked all around them. Her heart beat once, twice, slow. "Move, Elias," she said. "I can't." He didn't look at her. He stared at Boone. "If you kill him now, you'll never learn the whole list. That's the only church that matters every name on the ledger." Boone's smile was winter cold. "Listen to your new preacher, Evelyn. He's got a fine sermon on patience and a face for confession. Tell her, Crow. Tell her how close you stood when Hart bled out." Elias flinched again. The second crack in his calm was wider than the first. Evelyn's grip tightened. She had turned to fire already. There was no going back to water. The badge at her breast felt like a brand. Not Samuel's, not the valley's hers. The rifle steadied, her eyes set hard on Boone. She drew a breath, shallow and hot. Then she raised the muzzle that last inch, and Elias Crow stepped into her line of fire, filling the sight picture with his chest, leaving her with a smoking room, a marked badge, and a choice that would change what burned next. Fire clawed its way up the cabin walls, swallowing timber and memory alike, as Boone Mercer and Elias Crow faced one another through the smoke, each demanding Evelyn Hart's loyalty, each promising salvation or ruin. The cabin's roof groaned above her, heavy with fire. Sparks rained down like burning snow, settling in her hair, biting her skin. Evelyn's lungs scraped raw with every breath of smoke. She stood frozen between the two men, Samuel's charred badge hot against her chest, her rifle steady but her hands trembling. Boone's voice cut through the roar of flames. "Evelyn, you can't hold both roads. Come with me. And you live. Stand with him." He jerked his head toward Elias. "And you burn with the rest of this valley." Elias's stance tightened, his revolver steady, blood still trickling down his arm from the grazing bullet. "He's a liar, Evelyn. He'll torch every house from here to the ridge until the valley bows to him. You follow him. You'll be the widow of 2 graves instead of 1. Her chest heaved, her eyes burning not just from the smoke but from the weight of years colliding. Boone, the boy she had once loved by the creek, his laughter bright as summer sunlight. Samuel, the man she had chosen, his steadiness like oak, though secrets had hollowed him from within. Elias, the stranger scarred by fire, bound to both men yet separate, holding out truth and betrayal in equal measure. Every memory, every choice, every buried lie seemed to converge here in this inferno. The walls buckled behind her, a plank crashing down and scattering embers across the floor. The fire devoured Samuel's chair, the one he had always claimed as his own, its blackened frame collapsing in on itself. Evelyn flinched, clutching the rifle tighter. Boone's eyes locked on hers, fierce and unrelenting. "You loved me once," he growled. "That don't just die. You think Samuel was safe? Look where it got him. I'm still here, Evelyn. I'm the fire that don't go out. Stand with me, and no one dares touch you." Her heart lurched at his words, old echoes stirring like ghosts. She had loved him, once. She had believed him unstoppable, eternal. And now here he stood, a man of fury and fire, his promise as intoxicating as it was poisonous. But Elias stepped closer, smoke swirling around his broad shoulders. His scarred face was streaked with soot, his voice low but firm. "He ain't offering love, Evelyn. He's offering chains made of fear. You know it. You saw it when the prices burned. You saw it in Rooker's betrayal. Boone's fire don't warm. It only destroys." Another beam split from the rafters above, crashing between them, showering sparks across the floor. Evelyn staggered back, shielding her face. Her ears rang with the fire's roar, her heart slamming against her ribs like a war drum. Her eyes darted to the window, the world outside a storm of orange. Boone's men circled in the distance, their shadows dancing against the flames. The valley itself seemed to wait, suspended on her choice. She turned back, Boone's gaze seared into her, wild and desperate. Elias's eyes, though shadowed with regret, held something steadier, faith, fragile but real. "You can't have both," Boone shouted, his voice ragged. "Choose." Her throat tightened. Every path led to fire. Choose Boone, and she damned herself to the flames of destruction. Choose Elias, and she gambled on a man who had once ridden with her enemy, who carried his own sins in silence. Choose neither, and she burned here with Samuel's ashes. Tears cut through the soot on her cheeks. She raised the rifle, her arm steady now, though her heart was breaking. The silence between them lasted only seconds, but it stretched into forever. Boone's chest rose and fell with fury, his hand on his revolver. Elias's hand hovered near his own, not yet raising it, waiting, watching her. The house shuddered. The floorboards beneath her feet split with a deafening crack, flames bursting through like hands reaching for her legs. Heat washed over her, blistering, suffocating. The world narrowed to Boone, Elias, and the fire. Her voice finally broke free, hoarse but strong. "No more lies, no more chains. I choose." The crack of a gunshot split the night. The sound slammed through the room, sharp as lightning. The recoil echoed off the walls, louder than the fire, louder than Boone's shouts, louder than Elias's silence. Evelyn gasped, her rifle jerking. Smoke swirled thick, hiding the truth. Someone staggered in, the haze, a silhouette bent, clutching their chest. But before she could see who had fallen, before she could breathe the truth, the fire surged louder, the cabin collapsing around them, cutting the moment short, leaving the answer buried in smoke and gunpowder. The gunshot tore through fire and shadow, but as the cabin collapsed, Evelyn could not see who had fallen, Boone, Elias, or the last fragile piece of her own heart. Dawn bled slowly across the valley, pale light spilling over blackened earth, and with it came silence, the kind that follows ruin. Evelyn Hart stood among the charred bones of her home, smoke curling skyward in thin, ghostly fingers. The fire had eaten through the night, gnawing every beam, every plank, every memory, until only a jagged skeleton of the cabin remained. The roof had caved, the walls sagged, the hearth cracked open. The place Samuel had built with his own hands, where Evelyn had buried his badge and tried to bury her grief, was gone. Ash clung to her skin and hair, smeared across her cheeks where tears had carved thin paths. Her palms bore fresh burns from clutching the glowing badge, a welt now etched into her flesh like a mark she could never scrub away. Yet as she stood amid the smoke, Evelyn no longer felt hollow. The fire had burned through her illusions as thoroughly as her home. She turned slowly, her eyes scanning the ground where the night had collapsed into chaos. Bodies lay sprawled in the dirt. Boone's men scattered among the ashes. Jed Monroe lay twisted by the barn's ruin, his torch quenched forever. Silas Creed was slumped over his rifle, his eyes open but seeing nothing. Harlan Voss had vanished into the smoke, though a dark trail in the dust suggested he had crawled off wounded. But her gaze was drawn to the two men who had defined the night. Elias Crow knelt against a blackened beam, one hand pressed to his side where blood seeped dark and steady. His face was streaked with soot and pain, but his eyes burned with stubborn fire. He lived, though the cost was etched in every labored breath. And Boone Mercer, he lay sprawled on his back near the broken fence line, his revolver inches from his hand, his coat scorched by flame. His chest no longer rose. For all his fire, for all his fury, Boone's end had come not in glory but in ash. Evelyn stood over him, her rifle still clutched tight, though her arms trembled. Boone's face, lit by dawn instead of fire, looked younger in death, almost like the boy she had once known. His eyes, closed now, hid both the promises he had whispered to her beneath the summer stars and the fury that had consumed the man he became. Her throat tightened, but no sob came. Boone had been love, loss, and ruin all bound into one, and now he was gone. She turned to Elias. He grimaced, trying to push himself upright, but faltered, his strength bleeding out with his wound. Evelyn rushed to him, slipping her shoulder under his arm to brace him. His weight bore down heavy, but she steadied herself, teeth gritted, refusing to let him fall. "You should have run," Elias rasped, his voice rough as gravel. "And leave you?" Evelyn's tone was sharp, but her chest ached with something softer beneath it. "Number, I've done enough leaving." He gave a faint, crooked smile, though pain tightened the edges. "Boone's gone. That's something, at least." Her eyes flicked back to Boone's body, lying silent in the ash. For a moment, she thought she saw smoke curling from his lips, as though he might rise again. But it was only the morning mist. The fire had finally claimed him. The sun climbed higher, washing the valley in weak light. Where once the cabin had stood proud against the horizon, there was now only ruin. The ashes mirrored Evelyn's soul, not empty, but transformed. The house had been her shelter, her prison of grief, her monument to Samuel's memory. Its destruction was brutal, yet in its place came a strange clarity. She was no longer the woman who whispered her husband's name into the silence, or the girl who had once dreamed by the creek with Boone Mercer. She was something new, scarred but unbroken, forged in fire. She looked down at her hand, the welted star still seared into her palm. The badge no longer belonged to Samuel. It belonged to her, to the choices she had made and those she had yet to face. "Evelyn," Elias murmured, dragging her attention back to him. His eyes, though weary with pain, held a question unspoken. "What now?" She didn't answer. Not yet. The valley was quiet, too quiet, but the silence carried a weight she could not trust. Boone's death had ended one fire, but Samuel's journal and the truths inside it still burned brighter than any flame. Rooker, the syndicate, the law itself, rotted from within. The valley's true danger had not ridden off with Boone's corpse. It still waited, hidden in daylight's calm. She lifted her chin, her eyes narrowing at the horizon. The ashes of her home would not be her end. They would be the soil where something new began. Elias shifted against her shoulder, his breath sharp. "You're not broken," he said, as though the words surprised even him. "No," she whispered. Her gaze lingered on the smoldering ruin, then lifted to the ridge, where sunlight cut through the thinning smoke. "I'm not." The silence stretched, broken only by the faint creak of saddle leather. Evelyn stiffened, her hand tightening on the rifle. From the road beyond the fence, a lone rider approached, his silhouette framed against the rising Sunday. The horse moved at a measured pace, its rider straight-backed, calm in a way no outlaw ever was. As he drew closer, the glint of metal caught the light, bright, unmistakable, a marshal's star, polished and gleaming against his chest. Evelyn's breath caught. Boone was gone. Elias was wounded, but now another figure rode into her life, carrying the very symbol she had burned her hands to. Acclaim. Evelyn stood amid the ashes of her home, scarred but unbroken, as a lone rider approached the gleam of a marshal's star flashing in the dawn light. Marshal Abram Calloway rode into the ashes of Evelyn Hart's ruined homestead and offered her a choice: remain the widow of the past, or rise with justice as her own. The morning mist had thinned, curling over the blackened beams of what had once been Evelyn's cabin. Smoke still whispered from the ruins, the scent of char and sorrow heavy in the air. Evelyn stood barefoot in the ash, her hands trembling but steadying, each time she closed them around Samuel's burned badge. The welted star seared into her palm had cooled, but its weight lingered. The rider dismounted with the easy precision of a man long used to the saddle. Marshal Abram Calloway was tall, his shoulders broad beneath his coat, his hair streaked with gray at the temples. His eyes were sharp, watchful, and carried the kind of gravity that could silence a room without a word. The badge on his chest gleamed in the weak light of dawn, polished as though the fire of the valley had never touched it. He looked first at Boone Mercer's body sprawled near the fence line, then at Elias Crow, bloodied and pale but alive, leaning against the half-burned post. Finally, his gaze settled on Evelyn. He tipped his hat, not as a courtesy but as acknowledgement, as if he already knew she was the center of everything. "Mrs. Hart," he said, his voice deep, steady. "Seems the valley owes you more than it knows." Evelyn met his eyes without flinching. Her voice was raw, but it carried iron. "The valley owes Samuel, and the truth. Both have been buried long enough." The marshal's jaw tightened. "I read his journal." He glanced toward Elias, who shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. "I know about Rooker, about the men hiding behind law while Boone lit the matches. Samuel died because he chased what they wanted, kept quiet." Evelyn's chest ached, but she held his gaze. "And now, do you plan to bury it too? Another lawman pretending the fire ain't in his own house?" Marshal Calloway stepped closer, his boots crunching over the ash. His eyes softened, not weakly, but with a quiet respect. "No, ma'am. That's why I came. To finish what Samuel started, to put names in the open, no matter how high they sit in pew or office." He reached to his chest and unclipped his badge. The polished star gleamed in the sunlight, untouched by soot. He held it out, not as a token of pity, but as a choice. "You can stay here in the ruins living as the widow of what was," he said, his voice slow, deliberate. "Or you can rise with justice as your own. Samuel's fight don't need another martyr. It needs someone who's already walked through fire and came out standing." The silence between them was heavy. Evelyn's hand tightened around the charred badge she had pulled from the flames. Its edges cut her skin, its weight like stone. She looked down at it, the warped star a ghost of the man she had lost, of the lies that had shattered her life. Then she looked at the marshal's badge, gleaming, clean, unburned, waiting. The storm inside her rose sharp and clear. Grief, love, betrayal, fury. Samuel had carried the badge as duty, and died for it. Boone had despised the badge and burned to erase it. Elias had fled from it, scarred by what it meant. And she had hidden it, buried it, feared it. But now she understood. The badge was not Samuel's, nor Boone's, nor even the marshal's. It was hers, if she chose it. Her voice cracked, but she did not look away. "I won't be Samuel's widow anymore. I won't be Boone's ghost. I'll be my own." She stepped forward, opened her burned palm, and pressed Samuel's badge into the marshal's hand. That was his. It died with him. Then she reached with her other hand and took the marshal's star. It was cool against her skin, but it felt alive, steady, unyielding. She pinned it to her chest, above the welted scar in her palm, and for the first time since Samuel's death, she felt her lungs expand fully. The fire had not broken her, it had forged her. Marshal Calloway nodded once, his eyes glinting. Then it settled. The valley will hear a new name, Not Samuel Hart, not Boone Mercer, Evelyn Hart. Elias stirred against the post, his voice weak but clear. You'll have every gun turned on you, Evelyn. Men with power, men with gold. They won't let you carry that badge without bleed. Evelyn turned toward him, her eyes fierce, steady. Let them try. I've already bled, and I'm still here. The valley stretched wide before her, scarred by fire but alive. Families would rise again from the ashes. Fields would regrow. And now, for the first time, Evelyn felt she could rise too, not bound by grief or shadow, but driven by something stronger. Justice. She stood taller, her burned palm curled into a fist, the marshal's badge glinting on her chest. The dawn was brighter now, the smoke thinning, the air sharp with the promise of renewal. Evelyn Hart was no longer just the keeper of secrets beneath the floorboards. She was the bearer of fire forged into steel. But as she steadied Elias and turned her face toward the horizon, a sound split the quiet. Hooves. She stiffened, her hand flying to the rifle still slung over her shoulder. The marshal lifted his head, his hand falling to the butt of his revolver. From the ridge, a line of riders appeared, not one or two, but dozens. Their silhouettes were sharp against the morning sun, their movements slow, deliberate. At their head rode a man whose coat flapped in the wind, his hat brim low, his rifle resting easy across the saddle. Marshal Calloway's eyes narrowed. Boone's gang wasn't destroyed. Evelyn's chest tightened. She had thought Boone's death was the end of it. But this was only the beginning. The marshal's voice was calm, but his jaw was set like iron. This was the first fire. The valley ain't done burning yet. Evelyn gripped her rifle, her palm burning beneath the badge. For the first time, she did not feel fear. She felt ready. Evelyn Hart, scarred but unbroken, stood with the marshal's badge on her chest as Boone's gang returned in force over the ridge, the promise of a war that had only just begun. If this tale kept you on the edge of your seat, don't ride off just yet. Hit like to keep these stories alive, and subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter in Evelyn Hart's fight for justice. Share this video with a friend who loves a good Western legend, and let me know in the comments what you think Evelyn should do when Boone's gang rides back into the valley. The story's just begun. Comment what Evelyn should do next.